Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The Grand Archive of the Galactic Federation was, in a word, excessive. Floating in the void between star systems like some cosmic library that had gotten lost on its way to a more sensible location, it stretched across 3 kilometers of crystalline architecture and enough pretentious symbolism to make even the most pompous monarch weep with envy. Towers spiraled upward into nothing. Bridges connected chambers that defied geometry. And everywhere, there were records, genetic maps, genealogical trees, bloodline certificates stamped with so many official seals they could probably be used as body armor. This was where the galaxy kept receipts on who was related to whom, and more importantly, who had the right to wear a crown without getting laughed out of the room. And right now, the archive was hosting what could only be described as the universe's most awkward family reunion. Brainock stood at the center of the ceremonial chamber, his 6 chitinous legs trembling slightly as he adjusted the quantum gene sequencer for the 18th time that morning. He was what humans might call a praying mantis, if praying mantises wore spectacles, stood 8 feet tall, and had severe anxiety about getting tenure. His species, the Ithics, were known across the galaxy for 3 things: meticulous record-keeping, an unfortunate tendency to eat their mates, and absolutely zero tolerance for messy data. Right now, Brainock was experiencing all the symptoms of an academic catastrophe, which for an Ithics meant his antennae kept twitching, and he'd already gone through 4 bottles of crystallized stimulants. "Begin the authentication," droned the Arbiter, a floating mass of bioluminescent tentacles that served as the Federation's master of ceremonies. Its voice echoed through the chamber with all the warmth of a tax audit. The crowd, if you could call it that, consisted of roughly 24 representatives from various royal houses across 6 star systems. They sat, stood, floated, or coiled in their designated sections, each one radiating the kind of smugness that only comes from centuries of being told you're special because of who your great-great-great-grandmother married. Emperor Naldrix occupied the largest platform, naturally. He was a being of living crystal, roughly humanoid in shape, with a crown that was less worn and more embedded directly into his skull. Light refracted through him in painful rainbows, which was apparently a sign of genetic purity among his people. He'd been bragging for the past month that his bloodline could be traced back 1,019 generations without a single break. 1,019. Brainock had checked. Then double-checked. Then checked again, because Naldrix's representatives had been breathing down his neck with the kind of polite menace usually reserved for loan sharks. "House Naldrix, step forward," the Arbiter announced. Naldrix rose with the kind of slow, deliberate grace that said, "I have nowhere more important to be, because I am the most important thing happening." He approached the sequencer platform, and Brainock tried very hard not to let his anxiety show. "Your genetic sample, Majesty," Brainock said, mandibles clicking in what he hoped was a respectful manner. Naldrix extended one crystalline hand. A small drone extracted a microscopic fragment, nothing that would damage his precious royal personage, and fed it into the machine. The quantum gene sequencer hummed to life. It was a beautiful piece of technology, really. Took genetic markers, traced them backward through time using quantum probability matrices and residual biological signatures left in the fabric of space-time itself. Completely accurate, completely reliable, completely, at this very moment, losing its mind. The holographic display flickered. Numbers cascaded across the screen faster than Brainock could read them. The machine made a sound like a choir of dying birds. Then it showed the result. Generation 1019. Verified. Origin point. Planet Naldraxis. Royal line unbroken. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Naldrix practically glowed with satisfaction, which, given that he was made of crystal, was quite literal. But then the display flickered again. Brainock's antennae shot straight up. Wait, that's not... The machine was still running. The genetic trace wasn't stopping at generation 1019. It was going backward, further, further. The numbers climbed. 100 generations, 200, 500. Is this normal? Naldrix asked, his voice tight. No, Brainock said quietly. No, this is very much not normal. 2,000 generations, 2,500. The hologram began showing a genetic map, lines of ancestry spreading backward through time like roots searching for water. Other royal houses leaned forward, suddenly interested. And then, at approximately 2,800 generations back, something impossible happened. The line split. But not in the way royal lines usually split, with branches going to cousins and siblings. No, this split showed Naldrix's ancestry connecting to another genetic signature entirely. A signature that had no business being anywhere near a crystalline species from the outer reach. Error, Brainock muttered, tapping frantically at the controls. Must be contamination. The sample must have... Run the next house, the Arbiter commanded, clearly annoyed by the delay. Princess Odoran was next. He was from a species that looked like someone had taken a bird, made it sentient, given it an attitude problem, and then covered it in jewels. His people, the Avix, claimed a bloodline of 912 generations, all descended from the Sky Father himself, or so the creation myths went. The sequencer scanned him. Same result. Not the same number of generations, no, but the same impossible phenomenon. At roughly 2,600 generations back, Odoran's genetic line veered sideways and connected to the same mystery signature that had appeared in Naldrix's scan. Brainock felt his lunch threatening to make a reappearance, which for an Ithix was genuinely concerning given their digestive system. This can't be right, Odoran squawked. My line is pure. We have maintained genetic sanctity for... Next, the Arbiter said. High Matron Fenabika was third, reptilian, elegant, with scales that shimmered like oil on water and eyes that missed nothing. Her people claimed 800 generations of unbroken rule. The sequencer ran. The same anomaly appeared. Generation 2,400. Connection to the same unknown signature. By the time the 6th royal house had been scanned, the ceremonial chamber had descended into barely controlled chaos. Every single bloodline from 6 different star systems, 6 completely different species, all showed the same impossible convergence. They all traced back to a single genetic source. And that source, according to the sequencer's quantum geographic analysis, wasn't on Naldraxis, wasn't on Avix Prime, wasn't on any of the royal homeworlds. The coordinates that appeared on the screen pointed to a little yellow star, 3rd planet, Northern Hemisphere, Earth. Specifically, Earth approximately 40,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries. Brainock stared at the display, then at the crowd of increasingly agitated royals, then back at the display. This is absurd, Naldrix said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. There must be an error in your machine, genealogist. My people have never set foot on that backwater planet. We were crystal-based life forms when Earth was still cooling from primordial soup. The machine doesn't lie, Brainock said weakly. The quantum signatures are clear. All 6 royal lines converge at this point in space-time. Then your machine is broken, Odoran shrieked. Perhaps, the Arbiter interrupted, its tentacles writhing thoughtfully. We should investigate before jumping to conclusions. Genealogist Brennock, do you have access to any genetic samples from Earth to rule out contamination? Brennock's mandibles clicked nervously. Well, yes, actually. There's a human in the observation gallery, junior member of the Federation. She's been sitting there for the past 3 hours, looking bored. Every eye, stalk, sensor, and optical unit in the room turned toward the observation gallery. There, slouched in a chair that was definitely not designed for human anatomy, eating something bright orange from a vending machine, was Fiona. She had not been paying attention. At all. She'd brought a book. She'd read the book. She'd gotten hungry. She'd found the alien vending machine and, through a combination of luck and aggressive button-pushing, had acquired something that tasted vaguely like cheese puffs. Now, suddenly, everyone was staring at her. She stopped mid-chew. "What? Would you mind," the Arbiter said with exaggerated patience, "providing a genetic sample? Purely to rule out equipment contamination." Fiona blinked. Sure? I guess." She made her way down to the chamber floor, still holding her bag of alien cheese puffs, completely unaware that she was about to become the most important person in the galaxy. Brennock extracted a sample, a quick cheek swab, nothing invasive. He loaded it into the sequencer with hands that were definitely not shaking. Definitely not. He pressed the activation button. The machine hummed. Then it screamed. Actual alarms went off. The holographic display turned violent red. Sparks shot from the control panel. Smoke began pouring from the sequencer's core processor. And there, flickering in and out through the chaos, was a genetic map that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Fiona's DNA signature was glowing like a supernova. And every single one of those royal bloodlines, all 6 of them, all those thousands of generations, traced backward through time and space and quantum probability, and ended at her. Not at her specifically, the readout clarified, but at her genetic line. At a common human ancestor who had lived 40,000 years ago, in the region Earth scientists called the Fertile Crescent, though that name wouldn't exist for another 38,000 years. The name appeared in the database, reconstructed through linguistic quantum archaeology, written in symbols that predated written language. Davin, the first one, the giver. Brennock looked at the readout, then at Fiona, who was still holding her cheese puffs and looking utterly confused, then at the 6 royal representatives, whose expressions ranged from horror to disbelief, to one prince who looked like he might be having an aneurysm. "So," Fiona said slowly, "is that a yes or a no on the contamination thing?" The silence that followed was the kind of silence that makes grown diplomats wish they'd chosen literally any other career path. Fiona stood there, cheese puff dust on her fingers, looking at a holographic display that was simultaneously showing her DNA and suggesting she was somehow the genetic grandmother to 6 alien royal families. She did what any reasonable person would do in that situation. She laughed. "Okay, good one," she said, wiping her hands on her pants. "Is this one of those prank shows? Am I on Galactic television right now?" Nobody answered, mostly because they were too busy having existential crises. Emperor Naldrix had gone completely opaque, which, for a crystal-based life form, was the equivalent of a human turning white as a sheet. Prince Odoran's feathers had puffed up to twice their normal size, making him look like an extremely expensive, extremely angry pillow. High Matron Fenbika's scales had shifted to a deep purple, which Brennock's anthropological database helpfully informed him meant either deep contemplation or about to commit murder. The Arbiter's tentacles had tied themselves into what could only be described as a knot of confusion. "This is impossible," Naldrix said finally, his voice resonating like crystal wind chimes in a hurricane. "I am, descended from the pure formation, the first beings to achieve consciousness in the silicon fields of Naldraxis. We were old when this human's planet was still molten rock." "The data doesn't lie," Brednock said, though his voice came out more like a squeak. He was frantically running diagnostics on the sequencer, hoping, praying to whatever ethics deity handled academic embarrassment that this was all just a catastrophic equipment failure. The diagnostics came back green. Perfect function. 0 errors. He wanted to scream. "Run it again," Odoran demanded, his crest feathers vibrating with indignation. "Obviously the machine is malfunctioning. There is no possible universe in which my divine bloodline connects to a—" Ah! He gestured wildly at Fiona. "A snack eater." "Hey," Fiona said mildly, "these are really good snacks." "Run it again," Brednock did. He pulled a fresh sample from Fiona, used a completely different sequencer, triple-checked every calibration, and even said a small prayer to the gods of peer review. The second machine took longer to process. The chamber held its collective breath, or whatever the equivalent was for species that didn't technically breathe. The results appeared. Identical. Fiona's genetic signature sat at the root of a family tree that branched out across 40,000 years and 6 star systems. The quantum probability matrix showed connection points, moments in deep time where human DNA had somehow, impossibly, merged with the progenitor lines of 6 completely different alien species. The statistical likelihood of this happening by chance was approximately 1 in 10 to the power of 98, which, for those keeping track, was the kind of number that made mathematicians weep and probability itself file a complaint. "This is ridiculous," Fiona said, staring at the display. "I'm an accountant from Denver. My family tree includes a bunch of Irish immigrants and one guy who maybe fought in the Civil War, but probably just told people he did. There's no way I'm related to, she squinted at the hologram, crystal people and angry birds. The Aviks are a proud warrior race with a noble heritage spanning millennia," Odoran shrieked. "You look like a peacock who shops at expensive jewelry stores," Fiona said. "No offense?" "Great offense!" The Arbiter raised several tentacles for silence. "Clearly, we need more data. Genealogist, can you trace the specific convergence point? When and where did these genetic lines connect?" Brednock's fingers, all 12 of them, danced across the control panel. He pulled up the temporal geographic analysis, zooming in on the convergence point that the machine had identified. The hologram expanded, showing a 3-dimensional map of Earth, as it had existed 40,000 years ago. The planet looked different then. Ice sheets covered large portions of the northern hemisphere. Sea levels were lower. Land masses that would one day be underwater were still exposed. And there, in what would eventually become the Middle East, was a blinking red marker. "The genetic convergence point," Brednock said, his voice steady despite the fact that his entire worldview was currently being fed through a shredder, "occurred approximately 41,600 years ago, give or take 300 years. The location is in the northern region of Earth's African-Eurasian landmass." "That's insanely specific," Fiona said. "Quantum genetic dating is quite precise," Brednock replied. "The sequencer can track residual quantum signatures left in biological matter across time. It's like, how would you say, reading the echoes of DNA through space-time." "That sounds made up." "It's very real, I assure you." The hologram zoomed in further. The red marker resolved into a cluster of genetic signatures, a small population group, pre-agricultural humans, hunter-gatherers, living in small tribal units, following animal migrations, scratching out existence during an ice age. And yet, according to the data, this was where it all began, where 6 impossible family trees took root. "How is this possible?" Fenbika asked. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was an edge to it. "My people evolved on a planet 3,000 light-years from Earth. We are silicon-based. Our chemistry is fundamentally different. There is no biological pathway that would allow for genetic mixing. Unless," Brednock said slowly, pieces clicking together in his mind, like a particularly horrifying puzzle. "The mixing happened before your people evolved into their current form." The chamber went quiet again. "Explain," the arbiter demanded. Brednock pulled up a secondary analysis, this one showing evolutionary timelines. "Look at the data. Each of your species shows a genetic bottleneck approximately 40,000 years ago. A moment where genetic diversity suddenly collapses and then explodes in a new direction. We always assumed these were natural evolutionary pressures, environmental changes, adaptation events." He highlighted the dates. They all matched, within 100 years of each other. All 6 species, on 6 different planets, thousands of light-years apart, had experienced the same evolutionary jump at the same moment in cosmic time. "That's not natural selection," Fenbika said quietly. "That's intervention." "But by whom?" Naldrix demanded. "And what does this human have to do with it?" All eyes turned back to Fiona, who was beginning to regret ever accepting the assignment to attend this stupid ceremony. "Don't look at me," she said. "I barely passed high school biology. I can't even keep a cactus alive. There's no way I'm responsible for galactic genetic engineering or whatever this is." "Not you specifically," Brednock said, his mind racing. "But your ancestors, your genetic line. The data is clear. 40,000 years ago, a human population group possessed a genetic marker that somehow became integrated into 6 different alien species across the galaxy." "How does that even work?" Fiona asked. "Did my ancestors just hop on a spaceship and start making friends with aliens? Because I'm pretty sure we didn't have spaceships 40,000 years ago. We barely had the wheel." "The wheel wasn't invented for another 35,000 years, Brednock corrected automatically. "That's my point." "Perhaps," the arbiter said, tentacles writhing in thought, "we should access the deep archives, the really old ones, the ones we don't like to talk about." A chill went through the chamber. Even Brednock, who lived for archival research, felt a twinge of unease. The deep archives were where the Federation kept records from before the Federation, from the time of the precursors, the ancient ones, the civilization that had supposedly seeded the galaxy with life and then vanished. Most people treated precursor stories like myths, legends, the galaxy's version of "my uncle works at Nintendo." But if those myths were real— "Access granted," the arbiter said. "Genealogist, download the precursor genetic databases. Cross-reference with the human marker." Brednock did, though his hands were shaking now. The precursor files were massive, encrypted, protected by security protocols that made bank vaults look like unlocked screen doors. It took 20 minutes just to get through the authentication process. When the data finally loaded, Brednock felt his respiratory system forget how to function. "Oh," he said quietly. "Oh?" Naldrix repeated. "What do you mean, oh? I hate oh. Oh is never good." "The precursors," Brednock said, staring at the screen, "visited Earth 41,000 800 years ago. It's documented. They made contact with a human population group in the northern regions, and according to these records, they didn't just observe. What did they do? Fiona asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Brainock turned to look at her, his compound eyes reflecting the light of the hologram in 1,000 facets. They asked for volunteers, he said. They were dying. Their species was failing. And they needed genetic diversity, adaptability, something their own rigid biology couldn't provide anymore. So they found humans, early humans, who had this incredible genetic flexibility, this ability to adapt and survive and change. He pulled up a document, ancient text translated through 50 languages and a dozen different writing systems. They made an agreement, a trade. They would take a small group of humans, modify their genetics to survive on different worlds, and in exchange, they would give humanity the tools to one day reach the stars. That's insane, Fiona said. That's what happened, Brainock replied. And according to these records, the person who organized the volunteers, who convinced the tribes to let their people go, who negotiated with beings from the stars, he highlighted a name in the document. It was written in reconstructed Proto-Indo-European, but the translation appeared in glowing letters above it. His name was Davin. Fiona stared at the name, at the genetic marker still glowing on the hologram, at the 6 royal families who were looking increasingly uncomfortable with where this was going. So, you're telling me, she said slowly, that 40,000 years ago, my ancestor made a deal with ancient aliens, sent a bunch of humans to different planets, and those humans eventually became you guys? That appears to be accurate, Brainock said. And now you're all royalty because of it? Our bloodlines are pure, Odoran protested weakly. Your bloodlines are human, Fiona said, and started laughing again. She couldn't help it. The absurdity was too much. You're all just evolved humans. Fancy space humans with crystals and feathers and scales, but humans all the same. This is preposterous, Naldric said, but his voice had lost its certainty. The data supports it, Brainock said apologetically. I'm sorry, but the data really supports it. High Matron Fenbika sat back, her scales shifting through several colors before settling on a thoughtful silver. If this is true, she said quietly, then we're not alien at all. We're diaspora, children of Earth who grew up far from home. Which means, Fiona said, still grinning, that I'm technically your very distant cousin. The looks on their faces were absolutely priceless. The Galactic Federation, it turned out, was very good at bureaucracy, but absolutely terrible at handling existential crises. Within 6 hours of Fiona's revelation, the Grand Archive had been sealed, locked down tighter than a neutron star, and flooded with representatives from approximately 80 different species, all of whom had opinions about what this meant, and most of whom were shouting those opinions at maximum volume. Fiona had been moved to what the Federation called a secure diplomatic suite, and what she called a really weird hotel room with furniture that doesn't make sense. There was something that might have been a bed, if beds were made of hovering gel and hummed at frequencies that made her teeth ache. She'd ended up sleeping on the floor. Now she sat in a conference room that was somehow both too large and too small, surrounded by aliens having what could only be described as a collective meltdown. Brainock stood at the front, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past day. His antennae drooped. His usually pristine carapace was scuffed. He'd been awake for 38 hours straight, running tests, cross-referencing databases, and fielding angry calls from academic institutions across the galaxy, who wanted to know why their entire understanding of xenobiology was apparently garbage. "Let me get this straight," said Ambassador Pidnick, a blob-like creature that smelled faintly of vanilla and taxation policy. "You're telling us that 6 of the oldest royal houses in the Federation are actually human? Genetically descended from human volunteers who were modified by the precursors? Yes," Brainox said tiredly. "That's absurd. The data is quite conclusive. But they don't look human." 40,000 years of evolution on different planets will do that, Brainox replied. "Consider Earth itself. Humans who stayed on that planet diversified significantly, even within the same environment. Now imagine that pressure multiplied across completely different atmospheric conditions, gravity wells, radiation levels, available nutrients." "We get it," Fenbika interrupted. She'd been quiet for most of the meeting, her scales a muted gray that suggested deep thought. "The question isn't whether this happened. Clearly it did. The question is what we do about it." "Do?" Odoran squawked. He'd calmed down slightly since yesterday, though his feathers still looked aggressively ruffled. "What is there to do? This is a disaster. My entire legitimacy as Crown Prince rests on divine bloodline. You're telling me I'm descended from primitive apes who threw rocks at each other?" "Hey," Fiona said from her corner of the room, "we also threw spears. Give us some credit." "Not helping." "The legitimacy question is significant," the Arbiter noted, its tentacles forming what might have been a frown. "If the royal houses are not divinely appointed, but rather artificially created through precursor intervention, that raises questions about their right to rule. Or," Naldrix said slowly, "it validates our right to rule even further." Everyone turned to look at him. The Crystal Emperor had been silent for most of the meeting, processing, thinking. Now he rose, light refracting through his form in calculated patterns. "Consider the facts," he continued. "Our ancestors were chosen by the precursors, selected from among all the species in the galaxy at that time, granted gifts, modifications, the ability to thrive on worlds that would kill ordinary beings. If anything, this proves we are exceptional." "You were chosen because you were adaptable," Fiona pointed out. "Not because you were special. The precursors needed flexible DNA. You guys were basically the galaxy's emergency backup drive. I prefer to think of it as being entrusted with a sacred duty," Naldrix said stiffly. "You can think of it however you want. Doesn't change what it is." Brannock cleared his throat, which involved several clicking sounds that made everyone wince. "There's more," he said. "I've been analyzing the precursor records in depth. The genetic modifications they made weren't just for survival." He pulled up a new hologram, this one showing a complex genetic structure that looked like a 3-dimensional snowflake made of light. "This is what I'm calling the quantum lock gene. It's present in all 6 royal lines, and it's also present in baseline human DNA. The precursors didn't invent it. They found it, in humans, and they were fascinated by it." "What does it do?" Fenbika asked. "It makes DNA incredibly stable across time while simultaneously allowing for rapid adaptation. It's a paradox, really. Most species either evolve slowly and maintain genetic integrity, or evolve quickly and lose their foundational structure. Humans, somehow, can do both." "That seems broken," Fiona said. "It's extraordinary," Brainock corrected. "The precursors spent millions of years trying to engineer something similar and failed. Then they found humans, barely out of the trees, already possessing it naturally." "So we're the galaxy's genetic freaks," Fiona said. "Great. You're the reason half the galaxy's dominant species exist," Brainock replied. I'd say that's fairly significant. Ambassador Pidnick burbled thoughtfully. If this quantum lock gene is so valuable, and it exists in humans naturally, why didn't the precursors just take human DNA and leave? Why bother with volunteers and modification? According to the records, Braynock said, pulling up another document, they tried that first. Cloning, artificial synthesis, forced extraction. None of it worked. The gene was tied to something else, something they couldn't quantify. Consciousness, maybe? Choice. Willingness. He zoomed in on a particular passage, the translation appearing in Federation Standard. They called it the gift of the willing. The modifications only took if the humans agreed to them. If they understood, on some level, what they were participating in. The precursors couldn't steal it. They could only receive it. The room went very quiet. "You're saying," Odoran said slowly, "that our ancestors volunteered for this?" "Not just volunteered," Braynock said. "According to these records, they were eager. The precursors made contact with a tribal confederation, showed them the stars, explained what they needed, and a man named Davin, who apparently led this confederation, organized the volunteers. Another hologram appeared. This one was a reconstruction, built from genetic memory and quantum echoes, showing a human figure standing on a cliff at night, looking up at a ship that hung in the sky like a second moon. The figure was tall, lean, with dark hair and darker eyes. He wore simple clothing, animal hides, primitive tools at his belt. But the way he stood, the set of his shoulders, suggested someone who'd spent his life making decisions that affected more than just himself. "Davin, the Uniter," Braynock read from the records, "peacemaker between tribes, speaker to the sky people, the first giver." "He sent his own children," Fenbika said softly, reading ahead in the document. "3 of them. Volunteered them for modification and transport to other worlds." "That's insane," Fiona said. "Who does that? Who lets their kids get taken by aliens?" "Someone who understood the opportunity," Neldrick said. "Someone who saw beyond his own lifetime." "Or someone who trusted the wrong people," Fiona countered. "The records suggest the trust was mutual," Braynock said. "The precursors gave humanity gifts in return. Advanced knowledge, encoded in genetic memory. Principles of agriculture, metallurgy, astronomy. Not enough to skip the work of civilization, but enough to give them an edge." "Jumpstart humanity," Fiona said. "Get us to the stars faster." "Precisely. So that one day you could reunite with your cousins." The weight of that statement settled over the room like a blanket made of awkward silences and philosophical implications. "So what now?" Ambassador Pidnick asked. "Do we announce this to the galaxy? Hide it? Pretend it never happened?" "We can't hide it," Braynock said. "Too many people already know. The data is in the archives. Scientists across the Federation will be replicating my work within weeks." "Then we control the narrative," Neldrick said. "Frame it properly. Emphasize the divine selection, the sacred trust." "Or," Fiona interrupted, "you could just tell the truth." "The truth is complicated," Odoran said. "The truth is simple," Fiona replied. 40,000 years ago, some humans made a choice to help strangers who needed help. And those strangers kept their promise. That's it. That's the story. "That's not inspirational enough for a royal dynasty," Odoran protested. "Maybe that's the problem with royal dynasties," Fiona said. Fenbika's scales shifted to an amused green. "She has a point. We've spent millennia justifying our rule through bloodline purity and divine mandate. Perhaps the real story is more valuable." "Which is?" Naldrix asked. That we're proof of what happens when species cooperate instead of conquer, Fenbika said. When they share instead of hoard. When they take risks to help each other survive. That's embarrassingly optimistic, Odoran muttered. That's humanity, Fiona said, grinning. We're obnoxiously hopeful. Apparently, you inherited that too. The debate raged for another 3 days. 3 days of committees, subcommittees, emergency sessions, and at least one fistfight between two diplomats that had to be broken up by security drones. The galaxy, it turned out, had very strong opinions about the revelation that 6 of its oldest royal houses were actually evolutionary offshoots of a species that had only joined the Federation 15 years ago, and still couldn't agree on whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Fiona spent most of that time alternating between bemused observation and aggressive napping. She'd tried to leave twice, but the Federation had politely informed her that she was now classified as a person of extreme diplomatic significance and couldn't go anywhere without an escort of at least 6 armed guards and 2 redundant translators. She'd responded by ordering Earth food through the station's supply network and introducing several alien species to the concept of coffee. The Ithics loved it. The Avics thought it was poison. Ambassador Pidnick had absorbed an entire cup through osmosis and spent 6 hours vibrating at frequencies that triggered motion sensors. On the 4th day, the Arbiter called a final assembly. The ceremonial chamber was packed. Every seat, platform, hovering space, and designated standing zone was filled with representatives from across the Federation. News drones buzzed at the perimeter, broadcasting to billions of beings on hundreds of worlds. Fiona stood near the front, wearing the same clothes she'd arrived in because nobody had thought to bring her luggage, flanked by Brennock on one side and a very nervous protocol officer on the other. The 6 royals occupied their platforms. They looked different now, less smug, more thoughtful. Naldrix's crystalline structure seemed somehow softer. Odoran's feathers were smoothed down. Fenbika's scales had settled into a contemplative blue. The Arbiter raised its tentacles for silence. "We have reached a decision," it announced, its voice echoing through the chamber and across the Ansible networks to watching billions. After extensive deliberation, consultation with historical records, and analysis of the genetic data provided by genealogist Brennock, the Federation Council has concluded that the findings are accurate and irrefutable. A murmur ran through the crowd. Fiona could feel the tension like a physical weight. The royal houses of Naldraxis, Avix Prime, Fenbika's Dominion, and 3 other sovereign nations are genetically descended from modified human volunteers who departed Earth approximately 41,600 years ago. These volunteers were selected and altered by the precursor civilization as part of a mutual exchange program. The Arbiter paused, letting that sink in. This changes nothing about their sovereignty. This changes nothing about their right to rule. But it does change our understanding of who we are and where we came from. Furthermore, the Arbiter continued, the Council has voted to grant Earth elevated status within the Federation in recognition of humanity's unique position as the genetic progenitor of multiple spacefaring civilizations. Fiona blinked. Wait, what? Earth will be granted a seat on the High Council, expanded trade privileges, and access to advanced technology previously restricted to senior member species. Okay, hold on, Fiona said, raising her hand like she was in school. Can I say something? The Arbiter's tentacles curled in what might have been surprise. You wish to address the Assembly? Yeah, I really do. There was a moment of confused consultation between various officials, several hurried whispered conversations, and at least one person frantically checking protocol manuals. Finally, the arbiter gestured toward the central platform. The human representative may speak. Fiona walked to the platform, very aware that billions of beings were now watching her. She'd never been great at public speaking. She'd once given a presentation at work about quarterly budgets and had accidentally said orgasm instead of organism when discussing corporate growth patterns. She really hoped she didn't do something like that now. "So," she said, her voice amplified across the chamber, "I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a politician. I got sent to this thing because I was the junior member of Earth's Federation office, and everyone else had better things to do. I was supposed to sit quietly, take notes, and maybe grab some weird alien snacks." A few beings in the audience made sounds that might have been laughter. "Instead, I accidentally became the genetic connection between humanity and half the galaxy's royal families. Which is weird. Really, really weird. And now you're offering Earth all these rewards, this elevated status, these privileges." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "And I think that's exactly the wrong response." The chamber went dead silent. "You want to honor Davin's legacy?" Fiona continued. "The guy who sent his own kids to the stars because he believed in helping strangers? Then don't elevate us. Don't give us special treatment because of something our ancestors did 40,000 years ago." "What would you have us do?" the arbiter asked. "Actually live up to the principles that Davin apparently believed in," Fiona said. "He didn't help the precursors because he expected payment. He did it because they needed help and he could provide it. That's the legacy. Not bloodlines, not genetic superiority. Just deciding to be decent when it mattered." She turned to face the royal platforms. "And you guys," she said, pointing at them, "you've been using your ancestry as justification for power for how long? Thousands of years? Claiming divine right, genetic purity, all that stuff?" "Our bloodlines are sacred," Odoran said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Your bloodlines are proof that a bunch of humans said yes when someone asked for help," Fiona replied. "That's it. That's what makes you special. Not the DNA, the choice." Naldrix stood, light cascading through his crystalline form. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the Federation should stop obsessing over bloodlines entirely," Fiona said. "Make this about merit instead of ancestry. Let people lead because they're good at leading, not because their great-great-great-grandfather knew the right people." "That would require restructuring centuries of tradition," Fenbika said. "Yeah, probably," Fiona agreed. "But isn't that what the precursors were trying to do? They took a bunch of adaptable humans and sent them to different worlds to try new things, to evolve, to change. Seems like staying stuck in old traditions kind of defeats the purpose." She looked back at the arbiter. "So here's what Earth wants. Not elevated status, not special privileges. We want the Federation to actually be what it claims to be. A cooperation between equals. A place where species help each other not because of bloodlines or ancient obligations, but because it's the right thing to do." "And if the Council refuses?" the arbiter asked. Fiona shrugged. "Then I guess we'll just keep being the weird little planet that accidentally became everyone's distant cousin. We're good at being underestimated." There was a long, loaded silence. Then Fenbika started laughing. It was a strange sound, coming from a reptilian throat, like wind chimes made of bone. But it was genuine. "She's right," the High Matron said, rising from her platform. "We've spent millennia hiding behind tradition because we were afraid of being ordinary. But this human stands here, with proof that she's connected to the oldest bloodlines in the galaxy, and asks for nothing, expects nothing, just wants us to be better." "That's embarrassingly human," Odoran muttered, but there was a smile in his voice. Naldric's dimmed and brightened, his species equivalent of a thoughtful nod. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we could establish a new accord, not based on Earth's genetic contribution, but on the principle that contribution represents." "What would you call such an accord?" the Arbiter asked. Brainock spoke up from his position at the side of the chamber. "If I may suggest," he said, his voice carrying across the space, "we could call it the Davin Accord, in honor of the first human who chose cooperation over isolation." The name hung in the air, resonating with something that felt almost sacred. "The Davin Accord," the Arbiter repeated. "A treaty establishing that member species of the Federation shall be judged by their actions and contributions, not their bloodlines or ancestry. That leadership shall be earned through merit, not inherited through genetics. That cooperation and mutual aid shall be the foundation of our civilization." "I vote in favor," Fenbika said immediately. "As do I," Naldrix agreed. "Against my better judgment," Odoran said, "I also support this." One by one, the representatives in the chamber voiced their agreement. Not all of them. Change never came that easily. But enough. More than enough. The Arbiter's tentacles formed a complex pattern that Fiona's translator interpreted as satisfied approval. "Then let it be recorded," the Arbiter declared. "This day marks the beginning of the Davin Accord. May we honor the legacy of cooperation that brought us together." Applause erupted through the chamber, a cacophony of sounds from dozens of different species, each celebrating in their own way. Fiona just stood there, slightly stunned, wondering how she'd gone from bored accountant to accidental revolutionary in less than a week. Brainock approached her as the crowd began to disperse. "That was quite a speech," he said. "Thanks. I think I nearly passed out halfway through." "You didn't show it." "Good to know my anxiety is subtle." He clicked his mandibles in what she'd learned was amusement. "For what it's worth, I think Davin would have been proud." "You never met him." "No," Brainock agreed. "But I've studied his legacy, and you just proved that whatever made him special wasn't the DNA. It was the perspective." Fiona smiled. "Yeah, well, someone had to say it." 3 months later, Fiona was back in Denver, sitting in her favorite coffee shop, reading the news on her tablet. The Davin Accord had been ratified by 80% of Federation member species. 3 royal houses had voluntarily transitioned to elected leadership. The galaxy was, slowly and messily, changing. Her tablet pinged with a message from Brainock. He'd been promoted to Director of Xenogenetic Studies and was apparently writing a book about the whole affair. He wanted to interview her for a chapter. She was considering it when someone bumped into her table, spilling coffee across her notes. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry," the person said, grabbing napkins. Fiona looked up. The person was tall, with dark hair and striking features. For just a moment, they reminded her of the holographic reconstruction of Davin she'd seen in the archive. Probably just coincidence. The universe was full of coincidences. "No worries," Fiona said, helping clean up. "Happens all the time." The person smiled, apologized again, and left. Fiona watched them go, then looked back at her tablet, at the news about the Accord, at the message from Brainock. She started laughing. Couldn't help it. 40,000 years later, and humans were still just trying to be decent to strangers. Some things, apparently, never changed. And honestly, that was exactly how it should be.